Good morning. It's a pleasure to start a new Quo Vadis, this space where the institution leaves the technical part aside and we deal with our role as citizens. We'd like to discuss the topic of representativeness. And the best way of discussing that is having here Luis, a farmer that moved to politics, as now a national member of Congress, and Lionel, a fighter from La Matanza that for a long time has been working with this political reality. So it's going to be a very interesting morning. And Jorge is moderating here with me. So thank you, Pedro. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to thank our panelists, as you said. The reflection here in the Quo Vadis space in the final day of the Congress, and particularly political representativeness. That's so important. And all the stories we can share here of two people that have made an effort to be in certain places. Luis, he moved to the legislative branch. Luis studied to try and find answers because the political analysis of the Argentine present is, well, we journalists are always looking for answers, which is a difficult task, but it's very important. So let's start the discussion. Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. As you mentioned, I'm originally from the district of La Matanza, from La Ferrere. I studied political science, and for many years now I've been a social and political activist in my district, both from the local club, being part of political groups that we campaigned throughout La Matanza. We were auditors in the elections. So based on the topic of this panel, representativeness or blanket list, I'd like to mention two aspects, trying to be as brief as possible. On the one hand, how the blanket list sometimes hinders local elections and how serious it is for representativeness. And the other side is the importance of auditing and counting the votes, no matter what system we use. So to give you some context as to where I come from and where my experience comes from, La Matanza is the most populated district in the country, 1.8 million people with 1.1 million voters. And that represents 8.5% of the votes of the province of Buenos Aires and 3% of the votes of Argentina. So what happens in La Matanza has an impact on the results we're going to have for governor, for president, and also in the provincial and national congresses. In terms of elections, La Matanza has 444 schools to audit in the elections. That is what we audited last year. 3,200 voting stations. That represents huge work in an elections day. It's a Sunday where more than 5,000 people are working in the streets to take care of the votes, for logistics, a lot of things to make this work and to make sure that those 5,000 people that are working in the streets on a Sunday are protecting what people are voting for. So having given you some context, why is it that the blanket list hinders the elections of local representatives? In large districts as La Matanza and other districts in the greater Buenos Aires area, there are many districts with almost 1 million people. La Matanza is the most extreme case. The distance between the local government and the citizens is very large. They are not close to the citizens, as you would expect that it would be the case in a local district. That is not the case. Mayors are celebrities. The neighbors just see them on TV. It's not that you go out on the street, you go to the doctor, and you run across the mayor. That never happens. Of course, the members of the council are not known by anybody. Nobody knows them, except for the few of us that are involved in the political world, and we know the members of the council, but the ordinary citizen does not. And this is not good. Because in the past 30 or 40 years, the municipalities have acquired more and more powers. In the past, municipalities were not involved in some aspects, but now they are, like security, education, health, economic development, environment, local infrastructure. There are lots of issues that the local districts are involved in now. So they have a direct impact on the lives of people. The mayor, our mayor in each district, and what they do in their 4 years will have a direct impact on the lives of people living in that district. So it's not a minor issue that the local discussion is being put aside in the context of the discussion of the blanket list. Because as you know, the blanket list is a ticket that is very long, includes the president, members of Congress, senators, governors, provincial legislators, mayors, members of the local councils. So it can have 10 or 11 parts. Each part is a separate election. We take it for granted because it's just one day, it's the same ballot, but each part of that ticket is a separate election, and we are voting for different things. In the national election, what is the focus of attention of the political debate? What do citizens pay attention to? The election of the president. We discuss for many months before the elections about the candidates for presidents, what they do, their private lives, their proposals. Everything revolves around that debate. And there's almost no debate about what should happen and about the policies that we should have at the municipalities. And as I said, in this case, some districts have a lot of people, and what happens in one district will affect a lot of people. What happens in La Matanza affects all the greater Buenos Aires area, the neighboring districts, the city of Buenos Aires, the good and the bad things. So this is a challenge. How do we make the local debate have an impact on the population, so that it's discussed with the people, so that it is in the public opinion agenda? Debating about the proposals of candidates to mayor. We've been working for many years now in La Matanza with a local party headed by Lalo Creus. He was our candidate to mayor last year, and we've emphasized showing the problems at La Matanza and generating proposals for that. And it's very difficult because people look at what the president does or what the governor does, and they don't know much about the true competencies of the mayors. In terms of blanket lists, in general, candidates to president drag behind them all the candidates. So that includes members of Congress, members of the local council, that when you voted for the president, you had no idea who they were. And so they become members of Congress and members of the local council. The same happens with the mayors. It's very difficult to have attraction from bottom up. Local candidates to drag votes behind them for a national list. It's the opposite in general. The national candidates absorb the rest of the candidates positively or negatively. They will win or lose depending on the results of the president. So we've been working on making the inhabitants of La Matanza, that 1.1 million people, trying to pay attention to what is happening in La Matanza. We've been working a lot with the neighbors, creating government platforms, with a candidate that we moved all over the district, talking to everybody, creating teams. And even though we did not win the election, we reverted the trend. We reverted the trend in the sense that we, as I said, we didn't win and we did not manage to transform what happens in La Matanza. But our local ballot obtained 10,000 votes more than the vote for the national election, which was not the case in the past. It was always the opposite. So in our case, our local list obtained more votes than the national list, because I think we managed to convince some people, around 10,000 voters, that there was a local project that should be discussed separately from the candidates to governor and president. It doesn't mean it's not important. We also debate national and provincial policies. But some things should be considered locally, such as the social and productive integration of La Matanza with the rural area. There are many rural hectares in La Matanza. Nobody knows about it. Some districts in the greater Buenos Aires area are working with other districts around La Matanza, and La Matanza is not part of that joint work. So there are many things to be done. And briefly, I don't want to take more time, about the auditing in the elections. We have to protect our votes. As I said, we have a municipality with a lot of schools, a lot of voting stations, and things happen in some schools. What do I mean? You don't need just an auditor sitting there signing the envelopes and then signing the list. You need a team that can face also the threats that may be conducted by those that feel they are the owners of the school, that they wait for you outside the school with gangs to harass you. I mean, it's very difficult to be an auditor in municipalities like this, when there are very rooted municipal powers that have been in power for 30 or 40 years that are going to do everything not to lose that power. So about the auditing of the elections, I would like to mention the engagement. And whatever system we have to protect our votes. We have to ensure transparency in our elections, because that will give us democratic quality. We do have democratic quality in our country, but many things can be improved. And now Luis is going to share some tools that exist. And finally, the importance of individualizing the elections of local candidates, particularly in large districts. Perhaps it's easier in smaller districts for neighbors to know the candidates. That is not the case in big districts. Second, we shouldn't be afraid of the new electoral tools. There are many tools that can be applied. They are proven. They are even used in our country. The electronic vote, the single ballot, the province autonomy, so that the elections are held not on the same day as the presidential elections. And third and finally, we have to maintain the activism in society. The changes that happen because a lot of people push for that, not necessarily politicians, NGOs, engaged people, ordinary neighbors, business chambers that look for those changes and push from our own place. We shouldn't give in. There's resistance, of course there is resistance, because there's the statu quo. The statu quo is good for those that are in power, so we have to challenge that. And there have been changes in the regulations in our country to have systems that work a little better. We have to keep doing that. This year, we are discussing a lot this issue of the single ballot ticket, but there's a whole range of improvements we can introduce in our electoral system. So that's it. Thank you for your attention, and I will pass the floor to Luis. Thank you. It's very interesting to listen to you, Lionel. And then we have questions for you. Remember that in that QR code, if you scan it, you can ask questions that we will be receiving in this phone. Luis, you have the floor. Congratulations, Lionel. You're so passionate about it. It shows. So I did something different. I started in the private world. I worked, I studied, and then because of some, anger you have against politics, you start getting involved. Of course, many of you perhaps are starting just as I did. Perhaps for you, the export rights are one of the first reasons for your involvement in politics. But our realities in the place where we live changed. I was mayor in my town, and we did it with a lot of effort, trying to overcome the barriers that you have to start participating. The old political structures that have their barriers. I come from the radical party, so I have to enter the system, participate in the internal elections, obtain some validation from people that do not represent citizens. Because imagine today in the radical party, there are members that are over 40, over 50, and the youth is not represented. The entry barrier to become a member is very high. So what Lionel described, so apparently that barrier in La Matanza is much stronger, as you described, but fortunately, in the center of the country, and there is some correlation, I think. We can obtain empirical evidence that when you have areas of farming production where the area is more conservative, there are clearer rules of the game, and there's an accountability. There's the citizen demands that accountability because they are closer to what is happening than at least here in the greater Buenos Aires area.
You can see success cases in Mendoza, Santa Fe, and Córdoba in connection to the single ballot or the standardized ballot. And I congratulate you again, because listening to these political considerations that have to do with civic education, well, we need more people that would like to get trained, because there is this apathy by society in connection to the fact that structures, the current ones or the prior ones, did not really respond to people's needs. This is why outsiders come down to the limelight, such as Javier Milei, and because we are exhausted, we end up voting for different thinking structures, and this is a reason for us to discuss. We should talk about what is it that we want to have in Argentina. Do we want to have stable structures? I'm now at the House of Representatives. At the House, you may refer to Pichetto or to Camaño or to Negri. They are representatives who've been in the same position for the last 30 years. But that is not the reality of the House. The House has a turnaround of its members of 80%, those that are part of the House because of a need for change. We don't have experience being in a legislative power. It's different if we compare against the United States, where there's two big parties, but representatives and senators are professionals in politics, and people renew their votes in favor of them constantly. And this gives the system stability as long as they are reliable, because they represent interests of two opposing parties, but there's trust by people to their representatives, to their senators. There's people who are playing the same role for the last 20, 30 years. And I should go back to Lionel. He's a professional of politics. He's passionate about politics. And we need to have more of him. There should be less farmers that should be involved in the doing, but in civic education. And we need to train more people in how a healthy policy and healthy politics should be for all of us. Jesus Maria, where I was a mayor in the north of Córdoba, we tried to polish institutionality. There's very good institutionality in Córdoba, yet we tried to remove the participation from the state in the personal budget of the mayor, not to use the government state for politics. If you go to different neighborhoods in Córdoba, you see this is managed by and the person's name. That is no longer the case. It's forbidden. We have the single ballot. We have autonomy at the different districts, and we have a paper ballot. We continue to have that. And of course, this brings about chain votes, temptation to steal votes. We have the single ballot. We did quite well. Initially, we made our own mistakes. People really don't know how to choose their box, but we did really well. And based on these small examples, if we move them up to the entire province, then the whole thing has been very important. Today I brought this cheat sheet with me to find out what else to say. What we need to do, Pedro, is to find out how we manage. In 2008, since 2008, we've tried to empathize with the farm, from the fence to both sides. And, well, politics, if we refer to this belt from Entre Rios to Mendoza, and why not including the different cities that are productive, Tandilten and Glauken, among others, that have political stability greater than that in the urban area or in the outskirts, how to replicate what is happening with Lalo and Lionel in different areas of the outskirts of Buenos Aires, to put pressure from representative structures such as mine for there to be legislative changes in those areas. Well, the single ballot is one example. It's passed halfway through at the Senate, and we hope that it will finally be enacted. How to, from our places where there is a stable political structure with accountability, how can we go about it so that the reality in different districts may change? This can be done. We have a majority within the Congress, and we will be able to do it and to extrapolate it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Luis. First, I should like to recognize him as a very involved farmer. I wish we would have many more Luises around, where you feel that you are truly represented. There is this big divide between many legislators and those who vote those legislators. And it has to do with the subject matter of this conversation, that is representation or representativeness. You are at a house where I imagine you may get to see lots of representatives that are not accountable, as you well stated. They are just there because someone took a pen, wrote their names, and he serves ulterior motives, hidden motives. So what is your take about that? And what are the implications in the laws that are passed? The peril that we now have is that each one of the legislators, I don't want to put them all in the same pouch. There's very good legislators, and there's others who, unfortunately, because the system we have does not work, end up being very personalist, so to speak. The goal for which they are at the legislator is very private. But there's other parliamentary systems, such as that in the UK or in Germany, where legislators do not represent their own motives, but projects. They are split. We may find 4 or 5 different parties, but they run in favor of the project. Here we have many who represent their own personal project. Last Wednesday, a session was cancelled in the middle because part of the group that is now called Encuentro Federal wanted to have positions at the National General Auditing Office because agreements had not been honored. It was not a matter of defending the laws that would be discussed, that had to be related to safety and security, but rather their own reasons. So it's quite complex for the President of the House to come down to agreements, where agreements are actually not related to projects or to ideologies, where we can differ, of course, but they are rather related to the number of positions that can be distributed, to which they can have access. And this is really difficult. This has to do with the fact that there is no representativeness of majorities or sound parties. So there's outsiders that pop up all the time, and they don't pursue any ideas or changes, but rather their own agendas. the issue to keep discussing the blanket list vis-a-vis the representativeness we are observing, especially understanding this issue of the pen and writing down who will access to which position. And this is why we encounter these blanket lists when it comes to voting. The question is, how do we go about trying to modify the representativeness we should have, the reach of the representative towards the given district, that progress that was suggested on the basis law? There should be a discussion, and I would like for you, Luis, to give your opinion about it, to set aside the blanket list and make progress in a district-based representativeness, taking into consideration that in the province of Buenos Aires, the interests of La Matanza don't compare to the south of Buenos Aires, not even that of Las Flores, or that of the cattle raising basin. They will never coincide. We have a long way to make progress in La Matanza and in the outskirts areas, but interests will never coincide. So I talk about people that can put forward ideas into a bill of law that can then be passed and be the solution to different people and their interests. How do we make it happen? Lists are not put together based on territorial representation. That is to say, there should be a representative from Bahía Blanca based on the population, and a number of legislators are assigned. In La Matanza, they have a number of legislators based on the population. This is not the way lists are put together. And choosing legislators by areas or zones or by districts. This helps this to be the case, that the lineup on the parliament and on the legislator, you know you will have the representatives of one area or another. In Buenos Aires, you may have a candidate from La Matanza and the second from Lomas and the third from Morón. That could be the case. The first 3 candidates to national representatives are distributed this way, and the same happens with other positions. We need to work on this more intensively. The system is not fair because this is put together by those running on the top of the lists. They put the lists together based on political spaces and interests. The first position will be assigned for the political space of this KOL, and then if they design or they appoint someone from La Matanza, Buenos Aires, or Mar del Plata, that's secondary. So this is important to make progress in modifying the system so that lists are put together based on representation of the various territories, since, as you well mentioned, the province of Buenos Aires is very wide with varying realities. Therefore, the legislative representation of the province should be the fairest it can ever be, showing and representing the different realities. We need to work along those lines. It is my take that we are working along those lines based on the different citizen spaces. I mean, citizens and business owners should have to put pressure on this so that this stays strong on the agenda. Let me ask you a question. There is one by the audience. To you, Luis, it might be quite direct. What are the chances that you see, or that you, Lionel, see in the fact that it is passed halfway through, and what chances are of this to be enacted? There's lots of chances. If they want to send it back to the representatives, it's because of one of the boxes where it says all. If you check the box, then you choose all positions at once. That's quite dangerous because, considering the face on the ballot, you just check it all and you don't really individualize the other candidates. This happens in Córdoba. It's different in Mendoza and in Santa Fe. But that's the only thing to consider. So far, there is goodwill. There's always the politics behind it. And of course, there's gossiping around the fights between the vice president, the deputy, and the main. But we are the deputy and the president, but the vice president and the president. But that typically happens. Since Lalo is here, why don't you please talk about your experience with this system?
Con este sistema dentro de
How did you go with this system that has a different institutionality? How did you go about running as the first candidate, and how does it happen in La Matanza? Why don't you please say some more? Well, I talked about Jesus Maria. I had to sign up with the UCR. We had to win primaries. I was able to partner with the governor that was from the opposing parties, Chiaretti. But this is because I wanted to make progress and to validate surveys. People would support us. It's not easy at all. A budget of our own, that's an entry barrier as well. Why is it that people that have a budget or have money, they have the possibility to thrive, and those that are more skilled but who have no budget, they don't have such a possibility? There's restrictions, budgetarily speaking, and this has to be put on the table. And as to why I am the #1 candidate in Córdoba on behalf of Patricia Bullrich, Juntos por el Cambio, well, it has to do with persuasions. I went for it all. I played a decisive role in the technical teams under her. Then Patricia also wanted for the districts to get renewed. And also because I did a good management in Jesus Maria and it got revalidated. And this doesn't happen all the time, because when you show your resume, it doesn't really matter. What matters is how good lip service you pay of what you've done. There's lots of things that are sold that are not for real. There's a lot of window dressing, so to speak. This is the rule in politics. It is not common for citizens or for politicians to choose a person based on their background, as we do in companies, in corporations, when we hire people. This doesn't happen in politics. Luckily so, I can say that this was the reason why I was chosen. But it's too bad that the blanket list, whatever follows down, did not follow the same trail. In Buenos Aires, you have 70 different representatives. If I say that you should name the first 10, you won't name them. You don't know. Maybe the first 10 you do, but then you don't know the other 67 members. In La Matanza, well, I will talk about the local legislation, how deliberating councils are made up. The logic with which lists of political referents follows that same logic. This is how lists are lined up. Having local representation, it depends a lot on the key referent. This can be put together based on a given criterion, which can be good or bad. There is high lack of knowledge. I also believe there is this challenge, even though new tools are generated that encourage to think local lists or lists of representatives, we really need to work a lot in training citizens or in educating them in a context where people reject politics. People reject politics. And on top of that, you have to explain to them that they will have to vote representatives and senators based on a one-to-one basis. There's big challenges, but we need to go for it because our democracy will have greater quality and the representation will be better. We tried to generate more institutionality with a clean procedure in Jesus Maria, but the legislator in Córdoba refuses to follow this clean procedure. But if citizens don't care when it comes to voting what the background of candidates are, they won't either see whether I followed my tax return or whether I showed my clean record. So if the politician doesn't feel pressurized to be accountable, then things will not happen at the legislature, no changes will happen. So I think that it all depends on what you require. I mean, I'm on the other side, but you citizens should keep making pressure for institutionality to grow bigger. When I was the mayor and we had to pass the budget, there is a public hearing. No one would appear there. We did post it on the bulletin. Why don't you see us discuss to see what can be assigned to the budget? A person would always go there. He was an opponent, I'm sure, but people don't get involved. While things flow okay, people don't get involved. We do get involved when things explode and we end up voting something that is almost totally different or just anything. I will give the floor to Lalo because his reflection here is important. In the meantime, I'll say that in the United States, every primary school student has a book that's called Building Citizenship, and they truly learn the civic duties of citizens to pressurize on their representatives. Good morning. Thank you, Peter. This is Impro. Argentina has been suffering from what we all know, and there is a system or a mechanism in place that enables this to happen. The disruption of the current president has at least broken down the national mechanism. Many things are no longer the same as they used to be in this system, but there is a mechanism, the gear, the basis of that other mechanism, the province of Buenos Aires. 35% of the country's votes are at the outskirts of the city of Buenos Aires. So what clearly happens there will help a status quo to endure. The province of Buenos Aires remains the same old way. They even recovered some districts that were handled by the opposition. So this is what a blanket list is all about, the path through which, in a polarization that Massa achieved with lots of skills, lies, and money, ended up being chosen between two running mates for those that would run for president, and whatever was behind was linked to it as a phantom train. So this would be a jackpot to the bonaerense caste. So this is the basis of power of the national caste. So I agree with you. We need to democratize democracy. In Córdoba and in other provinces, a lot was progressed, but we need to go deeper into that. In Matanza, people go and work. They do pay taxes. They do exercise their citizens' power, but they are not honored or protected. Life is not honored there. So I appreciate this role that I was given. And I say, everybody knows, La Matanza is like the last straw that may break the camel's back for bad. So if we do end up changing that, then an effect, a very positive effect, a rippling one, will happen for the outskirts area of Buenos Aires and for the entire country.
¿Te parece, Pedro? Vamos con una pregunta que tengo aquí.
I have a question here from the audience, and we can comment on that. In such a fragile situation for democratic institutions and in the party membership, as well as in the structural and economic problems, Is it feasible to introduce changes in the system of government in the majority presidential system? Would that be organic to these circumstances? That is, changes in the system of government by majorities, I imagine, in the presidential election. And I would like to connect this, correct me if I'm wrong, with the primaries, because another reform that was being discussed, that may be discussed shortly, has to do with removing or not these primaries that also have some drawbacks, financial aspects, and also what happens to the parties and these primaries that weaken them politically. With the primaries, well, this discussion started recently. I truly didn't want to talk about it without knowing, because the first thing that comes to my mind is, yeah, we are spending a lot of money, we're wasting citizens' money, and it's good for nothing. But reality is, if you look around the world, there are primaries, perhaps in another way. They have different names, but they exist. There's a way of correcting it, or of giving everybody the possibility of participating. When you're in the government, you say that it's better not to have the primaries, because when you are in power, you have everything for your benefit. But the opposition, as it's so fragmented, they need to have an instrument to have, fortunately, outside the organization, to have ordinary people that can vote for second or third options, as happens in some districts in England or in Australia. So I think that these primaries are necessary, but we could make it cheaper with a single paper ballot. We would save a lot of paper. The decision would be faster, if that's the point. I would like to add, I agree with Luis. I agree that the primaries are necessary. They help break down with the statu quo within the political parties themselves, where sometimes the leader, without the primaries, would organize everything for their benefit. So these primaries make it possible to open the space to other individuals within the same political party. It's also true that the challenge is the cost. The tool can be made more agile, more economic. But another thing is that representativeness costs money. Improving the systems will cost money. So we will have to decide how far we go. And that reminded me of something. When I joined the House of Representatives, I thought, how will I account for what I do to my voters? How can I show I'm efficient? How many acts? How many bills? And you see that there are 8,000 people working, 4,000 in each house, a huge budget. But the truth is that it can be done in a cheaper way, but it's necessary because it's a power for citizens to stop some problems of democracy. So it will cost money, but we have to make it more efficient. We are running out of time, so if you have more questions, you can ask them afterwards. Just 1 minute for your final reflection. Lionel. Well, I'd just like to thank all of you for coming. I think I'm not from the farming sector. I'm sure that most of you come from this sector. So having the opportunity of presenting what happens in La Matanza, perhaps it's something foreign to many of you. Perhaps when you watch it on TV, you see more of the bad things that happen there. But the truth is that in our district, we have a lot of potential human resources, a population that works very hard to make it, and sometimes because of poor governments or things that happen, all that is hidden. So I also like to share this aspect. Thank you for your interest. And of course, if you want to continue discussing these topics, of course, you can find me. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for the space, for the invitation. Thank all of you for being here and for being worried about this. I think we have to try and make our representatives be as educated and trained as possible. Education and civic education is so important so that they are well prepared to be where they are. Personally, regardless of where I am, I will always fight for Argentina to be successful. I think that's also important. Our representatives should not think on themselves, but they should think of Argentina and the benefit of Argentina. Now we are in a situation where we all have to push forward for this current government to be successful, whether we have voted for it or not. We are at a moment that is a turning point for the country, but we have to change our mindset, not only in economic terms, that is the main interest of the president, but also in this, the electoral aspects, representativeness. And more so because of this attitude of destroying the status quo now in the economy, but let's do that also in politics. Well, thank you again. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Pedro, and thank you for coming. Luis, Lionel, thanks all of you for coming. I think this space is very valuable for reflection. I take some things with me. I will disagree with you because I want more Luis Picat and more Lionel, not only Lionel. I really value what you said in terms of being educated, being activists, and trying to change things in your dear district, but also having people from the farming sector that can contribute a lot. People that, as we've seen with Pedro recently, this intention of contributing something to the country. I think it's essential to return something to the country through politics. So each of you can somehow do something with your closer circle, and those that have been members of Aapresid for so many years. But in political terms, in your neighborhood, in your municipality, in your district, province, whatever you do to contribute is essential. More accountability and responsibility. If we want things to change, we have to know them. If we don't know who is ruling us, we don't know who is in the blanket list, or at least some of them, that's a challenge that Luis is proposing. Let's just not know the three first in the list. In the province of Buenos Aires, in the province of Santa Fe, there are many from Santa Fe here. Who are the candidates in the list? Do we know who they are? Do we know what they did to be there? How well educated they are? What are they offering? I think that's also our responsibility. This is something we should all do to start changing things in Argentina. And to you, I propose from your places also to start seeing what should I change and what is not being done according to the regulations in the legislative branch, because there are rules of the game. There are rules in the legislative branch. There are rules in our dear Congress, in both houses. Are those rules being followed? Well, perhaps this is a topic for another discussion, but this is also important. So thank you. Thank you all for being here. We've had this experience in Argentina in 1904 with Alfredo Palacios, an emblematic member of Congress, and then again in 1952 with Perón's administration. And there, the contact between the voters and the elected ones is much more direct. In successful countries, national members of Congress are chosen by uninominal districts, just as you select a mayor. So perhaps a national member of Congress is 4 days in the House, and then 1 day a week goes back to the district to test their performance. And then, in terms of cost, here, a member of Congress, in order to be elected, has to do advertising in La Matanza, in Bolívar, in Olavarría, a very high cost. But if they just have to be concentrated in a part of La Matanza, 500,000 people, 1/4 of La Matanza, it's a much lower cost. And then the contact. There are national members of Congress. I'm from Santa Fe, also a big, important province. And there are members of National Congress from Santa Fe that have voted in favor of a biofuel law that really affected many companies for several months because the amount of biodiesel had to be reduced. So at the end of the day, those that have the power based on the electoral code, those that have a power to choose the candidates for the blanket lists are the political parties, and the agenda of the political party is different from the agenda of citizens. So this system by districts, I think, would be very good for us. Thank you. And now to conclude, I highlight the importance of this space that Aapresid insists on having, and I think they should keep doing it. We would have loved to have a full room today, but it has to do with this. It has to do with that lack of interest, how defensive we are in an ecosystem that is challenging us, that makes us be in the defensive, and some leaders like Luis are willing, or Lionel are willing to give a step forward and face whatever, and come out of the trench and fight this we have ahead, the challenges. The reality is that Section 1 of our Constitution says that Argentina adopts as a form of government a representative federal republic without commas. The three words together, the three concepts at the same level. No one is more important than the other. And when we analyze those three concepts, we fail in all of them. There's no representatives, as we discussed today, representativeness. There's no republic because there's an imbalance among the three branches. And, well, federalism is an absolutely outstanding and pending topic. So we are few here, but we have to double our efforts so that we are more next year, because we have to be responsible for these changes, as Luis is doing, as Lionel is doing, and they deserve our applause. And we hope they inspire us, make decisions, and say, I want to change my country. And that is by playing the game, not waiting for a messiah to come and change things. Each of you has to be a factor of change. Otherwise, the same things will keep happening. So thank you so much. And let's double our efforts because it's worth it. Thank you.